Obviously, work collaboration is in the spotlight right now with so many workers working remotely, and there's an even greater need for better tools to collaborate. What sets Coda apart from Google, Google Docs, Microsoft Word?
Yeah, hi Emily. Thanks for having me. As you mentioned, I think the world's changing really fast, and so many workplace patterns are accelerating. I'd like to say we're zooming a decade into the future in just a few months, and so every form of that is being reconstructed. You know, Coda is an all-in-one document, so it blends together documents, spreadsheets, presentations, applications into one surface, so you don't have to go between them. But more importantly, in Coda, you can build docs as powerful as apps. And what really happens is you can close the gap between just documentation workflows and the real flows of how your business operates.
That said, it seems like, the vast majority of people are still using Microsoft and then Google. So what kind of traction is Coda getting, and how do you see sort of, surmounting some of these, incredibly entrenched giant companies?
Yeah, I think, and to be clear, I think we get used side by side with many of those tools. So I think, and often integrate very well with them. So I don't think it's necessarily a zero-sum game that way. We've been doing really well. We shipped Coda 1.0 about a year and a half ago, and it's a product that's built to spread. We're up to about 25,000 teams using Coda now all over the world. This year has been particularly good. We've more than doubled revenue this year, and so the momentum is quite high. But it's early days and lots more to come.
How are your thoughts evolving about the future of work? What do you think will be fundamentally different, even if and when we come out of a pandemic and there's a vaccine? I mean, do you think that things can spring back, or is the workplace changed for good?
I think it's changed for good. And as you mentioned, before starting Coda, I spent about 6 years running the YouTube teams at Google, and I've spent a long time at Microsoft before that. And I've been running some form of distributed teams for over a decade now. I like to say that if companies lean into that form of work, into being able to work remotely, work in distributed offices, and so on, the best practices you develop are actually better for your company. In other words, if you do distributed well, you're probably a better company in general. And so I think that what we're watching is companies learn those behaviors, and they won't want to go back when they realize it corrects for a lot of issues that companies naturally have. So I think it's here to stay.
We're standing by now for the president to take the podium at the White House. And I'm curious for you, as a growing business, obviously we've talked a lot about how small businesses are suffering in the pandemic. How do you expect business in Silicon Valley to change as we come out of this? I mean, obviously, I imagine, there are a lot of companies out there that can't raise funding right now. There are a lot of people who've lost their jobs. There have been a lot of layoffs in Silicon Valley. And as somebody who has worked here for so many years, what do you think the broader impact of this will be on Silicon Valley itself?
I mean, it's fairly extreme, right? As you mentioned, there's some companies for whom the pandemic is devastating, and some companies for whom it's enabling or accelerating. Coda is obviously in the latter camp, but as an industry as a whole, there are many companies that are struggling through it. I think moments of disruption have tended to be very positive for Silicon Valley in general. The crisis in 2009 led to a number of really great companies getting created. And I think for a region that thrives on change and innovation, any change is a good time for people to try new behaviors, try new tools. Certain businesses hurt, but other businesses really flourish. So I think we'll see a lot of innovation in this period.
Technology has thrived as a result of being, such a driver of allowing so much of this work to happen from home, us to remain connected while we are sheltering in place. At the same time, you've got intense scrutiny in Washington on big tech companies. Do you have any concern that these companies will become even more powerful, though, as a result of the pandemic, and that it will be harder for smaller companies, smaller startups to actually break through? I'm generally of the mindset that companies getting
too large is not good for the industry, and I think there's a healthy balance to be struck. Having worked at a couple of the largest tech companies, I think I've seen both sides of how companies operate when they're checked and when they're left unchecked. And I wouldn't be extreme on either side of that, but I think we're clearly in a world where many of the behaviors of the companies are indicative of them having scale that was unprecedented for most marketplaces.